this week on the Hull Library's YouTube channel as part of the Tea Break Talks. To be honest, I've had the time of my life this week for Hull Women's Week. I've had the pleasure of interviewing some incredible women and having some great discussions. And I'm very excited to be here tonight with three more incredible women. So welcoming Aneesa Akbar, Councillor Aneesa Akbar. We've got Karen Daniels and we've got Lisa Hilder. Now, Lisa is trustee for Preston Road Women's Centre. Karen is the Unite Women's representative, and Councillor Aneesa Akbar, of course, is Councillor for Hull Central Ward. So just to explain a little bit about how this evening's going to work, I'll be quiet very soon, and I'm going to hand over to our three guests who are each in turn going to talk a little bit about who they are and what they do. And then we're going to move into a bit of discussion about three key points this evening. The first being the launch of Period Dignity and what that's all about. So that was launched in Hull on Wednesday, and Karen's going to explain a little bit more about that. And then we're going to have a bit of discussion, and these two might overlap a little bit, but around women in work and particularly the effect of COVID on women over the past year. There'll be the opportunity to ask questions at the end, and really usefully, if you just look at the bottom of your toolbar, you'll just see Q&A at the bottom right. So at any point during the evening, if something just jumps out at you when someone's speaking, you can put your question in there at any point and we'll come to it at the end, and we'll try and answer it as best we can. And just to also let you know as well, this is being recorded. It will go out on YouTube afterwards, which will be really useful, I think. So without further ado, I am first of all going to hand over to Aneesa. Aneesa, it's lovely to have you here this evening. Thank you for joining us. Would you mind just giving a bit of an introduction to yourself and what it is that you do?
Thank you. And yeah, it's great to be here tonight to talk about a bit about myself and about some of the issues that we're going to be looking at later on. So my name's Aneesa. I'm 29. I'm a Labour councillor for Central. I am a scrutiny chair for infrastructure and energy, which can be quite masculine and like quite heavy with sort of like the infrastructure side of things, but it's incredibly fascinating and I'm really glad that I do it. I also sit on the advisory board for Tribune, which is a left-leaning magazine that goes out looking at different issues, and also a proud member of Unite and Bakers Union. So repping Karen there in the background, we can see Unite. So just a bit about me. So I've always been interested in social injustices. That's something that I've always been passionate about. I can't remember a time where I didn't care about how other people felt and trying to make things better. And I was really lucky growing up that I was always surrounded by books. So I got to be transported to different areas that I can just learn about, the magnitude of what people before me had done, and some of the ideas going forward about what to look at and how to make a better world. And so when I came to uni, so I grew up in Manchester, I came to uni to study politics. At the time, the tuition fees were being trebled. And I remember that being a massive thing as a working class kid, going to university and, being one of the first people to go to university. It just felt like such a massive thing that suddenly we were going to have like 9 grand fees that we were going to have to pay back. And I'd been really lucky that at college I'd had EMA, so the Education Maintenance Allowance, which allowed me to be at college. So I just felt this was an attack on, having that access or that right to education. So I got involved, went on some demos, was part of the occupation at uni. So was in staff house and we occupied the first floor, which was incredibly exhilarating and just felt amazing, like bringing people together from, college students to uni students and having the conversations about what we wanted education to look like and the fact that we wanted free education. And yeah, so that activism and the friends that I made there, like, have definitely stayed with me to being able to go on into sort of all other areas of my life and political activism. So when I left university, I was I was working at a call centre, And it's there that I sort of learned the power of trade unions. So I was a member of Bakers Union, and I was really struggling with my mental health at the time, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do after uni. I didn't know what opportunities there were, like, and I was really struggling with a lot of other aspects as well. And the Bakers Union really helped, gave that support and that sense of collectivism, to be able to challenge some of the practices that were going on in the workplace, and having the conversations with, you know, people that were a similar age to me, like 18, 19, 20, and talking about trade unions and talking about the fact that actually when we come together and when we have those conversations, we are able to make change and to have, like, you know, productive ways of working with each other. And one of my favorite sort of like things to talk about at the time when I was recruiting for the Bakers Union with other people in my floor was about that there's a little bit in Coronation Street where they all go on strike because one of their fellow workers had been sacked. And just the way in which they all rallied together, you know, to protect a fellow co-worker, and just the fact that when you withdraw your labour, that's the most powerful thing that you can do, and it's something that actually employers listen to. So from going to a workplace where all you talk about was just like, oh, when are we going to go to the pub, or like when's payday and all that sort of stuff, to then having conversations in our workplace about the fact that actually, like, we don't want to put up with this anymore, and that we were having conversations about, you know, like strikes and stuff like that. It was just incredible. It was just amazing. So that really sort of like sort of moved me on into getting more involved within the Labour Party. And I was really lucky that I had really good people that supported me, a lot of good women and a lot of good men who I've learned a lot from, and encouraged me to stand to be a Labour councillor. And it's just amazing. I love being a councillor. It's one of the best things that I've done, but it's also incredibly difficult. You hear some of the stories that, you know, people go through, and the effects of austerity and what that has had on people. It's harrowing, but it also allows you to want to create policy to make better changes within our community. And I think as well, what it's also really highlighted is that the last 10 years with austerity, the impact has been, you know, across the board on working class people, but it also on women. It's disproportionately affected women. And having those conversations and having people that are able to talk about that within the council is really important, because we're the ones that are developing the policy that are going to help and support, you know, the people of our city. So I think it's really, so for me at the minute, like, it's really important that I'm encouraging other women, other young people to get involved in politics so that they're able to have those conversations. It's something that I've been doing quite a lot since I've been a councillor, because I think it's really important that people's lived experiences are part of the policies that we implement and that we create going forward. And representation really matters within that, because, you know, if we don't have people who've experienced, have those experiences, then we're never really going to be able to fully create policy that that works for everyone. So I think I've gone on a bit of a ramble, but I think I'll end there. I was gonna be quite light-hearted in part of my comments, and I was gonna say, yeah, I'm also a really big fan of gnomes and stuff, but I think I've covered it, and I think I've been fine. So thank you.
But still a big fan of gnomes, Aneesa. I think we need to explore that one a little bit more later on, if that's all right. Thank you, that was brilliant. Okay, moving on to our next speaker, who is going to be Karen. And just to remind anyone that's watching as well, or anyone that's just joined us, at any point this evening, you can drop a question in the Q&A. It's down at the bottom at the right. Just as we're going along, drop anything in and we'll answer any questions at the end of the panel. Karen, over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Christina. Hi, I'm Karen Daniels. Just like to say, Aneesa had me there at both books and activism, because I've worked in libraries for 40 years this year, which means I've been a union rep for 30 years this year. I was originally with Unison, but I joined Unite the Union in 2009. And the opportunities that I've been given by my union have been absolutely fantastic. And the deeper I've got into the union work, the more passionate and committed that I've become, to the point where 3 years ago now I became the Hull and East Riding branch's first ever female branch secretary. I'm supported by a fantastic team of reps from Hull and East Riding, and we support community initiatives. We support each other in the workplace as much as we can. I've accidentally become a mental health champion. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but I've got involved in signing the employer up to the Time to Change pledge and things like that. I think that happened because increasingly, as society is starting to struggle more with mental health, so are people in the workplace, and they come to us when they've got difficulties that they need sorting out. Nobody ever rings their union rep to say, hi, just to let you know I love my job and I'm having a great time. So actually, increasingly, the kind of stuff that we deal with is becoming more and more challenging. There are a lot of people struggling quite badly out there, and I'm proud and privileged to be able to help them. I've also increasingly got more into women's issues. So for about the past 6 years now, I've been a regional delegate to the Unite Regional Women's Committee. And I will talk a little bit later in more detail. Proud to be part of the launch of the Unite's Period Dignity campaign. I have attended the Labour Party Women's Conference on a couple of occasions, and I've spoken at that. And I've also spoken at the TUC Women's Conference. I always say I'm not very good at speaking, but I always seem to find myself at a lectern speaking in front of between 400 and 1,200 women. I'm not quite sure how that happens. One of the things I'm most proud of in my workplace certainly was the negotiation of a first-rate menopause policy. I did a survey around the workplace of how the menopause was affecting women that I work with, and the results were actually really quite shocking. And there were women on the verge of quitting their job because of the effects of the menopause. We now have an absolutely superb menopause guidance and policy in the workplace, and it was a joint venture between the company and myself and Unite the Union. And it is, to say it's changed people's lives sounds melodramatic, but it literally has done. I'm also, my other great passion obviously is libraries. As I say, 40 years in libraries, and I've recently been co-opted onto the Unite National Libraries Committee. The concern obviously sometimes with national committees is that they are made up of very well-intentioned people, but people without any experience in the field. So I've spent a lot of years fighting for libraries. I intend to spend as many years as is there are to come fighting for libraries. And it's easy to combine the two, I find. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I think if I was to use two words to describe myself, it would be committed and passionate. I greatly believe that as a union rep, you either step up or you step down, and all of my members know that I believe it's a privilege to represent them, and that I'm there for them just about any time of day whenever they need me, and I will continue to stand with people like Aneesa to fight for social justice. And that's me.
Thank you, Karen, that was brilliant. And finally this evening I'd like to welcome Lisa Hilder, who is a trustee for Preston Road Women's Centre. Good evening, Lisa.
Hi, thanks for having me. So yes, my name's Lisa Hilder. I was born nearly 50 years ago now on the south coast in Portsmouth. I grew up in a seaside resort called Bognor Regis, and I came to Hull to study in 1989 and fell in love with Hull and have never left. I believe it's got just about the right pace of life, lots to do, but it doesn't buy into the rat race, and I really like that. And while I was at university, I started to volunteer, and volunteering has been part of my life ever since. When I finished university, I studied French and German. I decided to settle in Hull, and I got involved with Hull Women's Centre, and got a job there. And that was the beginning, really, of a journey into women's issues and feminism and understanding the world through a feminist lens. I worked at Hull Women's Centre for 2 or 3 years, and then something came up called the Preston Road New Deal for Communities Regeneration Programme, which some of you may be aware of. And I applied for a job there as leader of the Women's Project, as it was. And there was 2 paid workers, myself and another woman. And probably when we started off, about half a dozen volunteers. And we worked out of a classroom at Flinton Grove Primary School. And that was the beginning of an amazing journey, really, with Preston Road Women's Centre. We stayed at Flinton Grove Primary for about 18 months until we moved into some refurbished properties on the front of Preston Road at 60 to 62 Preston Road. And as part of establishing ourselves as a project with its own premises, we decided that we would reflect the ethos of the service by using the suffragette movement colours, purple, green and white. And we painted the outside of the house purple, green and white. And we very quickly became known as the Purple House on Preston Road. It was a symbol when we did it, but one of the happy unintended consequences was that it was a very noticeable building. And it meant that the women who needed our services could jump in a taxi or get on a bus anywhere in Hull and ask to go to the Purple House, and pretty much everybody knew where it was. So it was a very good way of enabling women to get to us when they needed us. And we started off from that one room, building on the issues that women presented with. So the issues that they came through the door with informed us about what we needed to do to meet their needs. And all of the services we've developed over the last 20 years have been as a result of what women have told us and how they have been forced to live their lives in a way that they don't want to. And today, the services that we have in our brand new building are a reflection of the women's issues that women all over the world face. So we have a specialist domestic abuse support service. We have safe accommodation for women all across the city. We have more than 200 properties where we house women and kids fleeing violence and abuse. We have a young women's support and advocacy service, which does what it says on the tin for young women between the ages of 10 and 25. We have a very strong volunteering programme, which enables women to give their time and learn experiences and skills in a safe and supported environment, but give back to other local women. And our volunteers are amazing and help us run every aspect of the service. We have a nursery on site for 18 0 to 5s, which is registered with Ofsted, provides very high quality childcare, so that any woman who walks through the door and needs a service can be assured that her little ones are looked after, well looked after, whilst she takes part in a training course or talks to a support worker if that's what she wants to do. In 2016, we established our own family law firm, Affordable Justice, and that was in response to something called LASPO, which was effectively the swinging cuts as a result of austerity to legal aid provision. And we knew from our service for domestic abuse that this would have a disastrous effect on many women and prevent them from accessing crucial civil law proceedings to keep themselves safe. So things like non-molestation orders, which used to be called injunctions, things like child proceedings that set the rules for mothers and fathers to see and be with their children, and special proceedings, special orders aimed at keeping women safe. We knew that LASPO was going to have this effect, and we felt it was unacceptable. So our solution was to establish our own family law firm, which operates on a not-for-profit basis and is available to women, in fact, all over the country, and enables them to get legal advice and representation at less than a third of the fees that would have to pay on the high street. So it brings justice into the realm of affordability, hence the name. At the centre, we also have a laundrette. We've got our training facilities, and essentially a woman can drop in, check us out, maybe just by using the laundrette. We also have a charity shop on site, so she can browse and get good quality secondhand goods for her or her kids. And again, just talk to the volunteers and understand what it is that we have on offer. We moved out of 60 to 62 Preston Road in 2018 into our new building, which is a bit further down Preston Road, but it's twice the size, and it is the first purpose-built women's centre in the United Kingdom. It took a lot of planning, took a lot of fundraising, and it's been tremendously successful. It's still purple, of course. We didn't want to change the symbolism, and we still wanted to be recognisable and easy to find. And it was a hard thing to achieve, but an incredibly rewarding thing to achieve, because we designed the building in conjunction with the women who use it, the volunteers who staff it, and the paid members of staff who have it as their workspace. So it's environmentally friendly, it's much more spacious, and the physical layout of the building reflects the journey through services that women have with us. So for me personally, it's something that I'm incredibly proud of being part of achieving. I did a lot of the fundraising to enable that building to be built, but it was a massive team effort for all the staff, all the volunteers, and everybody who made a donation. And we had donations from local people who did fundraising events for us. We had money from grant giving trusts, the lottery. So it was a real collective effort to provide a safe, supportive space for local women, and indeed women all over the country, because we're accessed by women who come to us who want to live in Hull and use some of our accommodation. As I mentioned, Affordable Justice operates across the UK. So it was a real success for women in Hull on all sorts of levels. I stopped being a paid worker at the Women's Centre in 2006 and moved into working in the NHS because I'm very passionate about public service and making a contribution. But I've remained with the Women's Centre because that's where my vocation is, and where I think the struggle still remains for equality for women, and most particularly tackling violence against women and girls. And that's one of the threads that runs all the way through what we do at the Women's Centre. So my personal career has taken me in lots of interesting different directions, and one of the elements of fundraising and income generation that we've used throughout the years is for the Women's Centre is social investment. And I became interested in that because it helped us to buy our first few properties for the Women's Centre. And it's something, it's an interest and an expertise that I've developed over the last 10 or 15 years. And I was recently appointed to the investment committee for Big Society Capital, which brokers £600 million worth of investment into projects and services all up and down the country that deliver social benefit. And through the Women's Centre's networks, we are looking to make investments that create financially sustainable services for women's sector organisations throughout the UK. And again, I'm really proud to be part of that, and to be part of the developing work of Preston Road Women's Centre that supports women's organisations in lots of different localities up and down the country. So I'll pause there. I've probably said enough for the moment, and happy to take any questions.
Fab, thank you, Lisa. And just again to reiterate, thank you again to Aneesa and to Karen and to Lisa for joining us this evening. It's at this point we move on to some discussion. And I'm going to start with periods, or more specifically, period dignity, which launched in Hull on Wednesday. So period dignity, Karen's going to explain a bit more, but period dignity, it seems that we still have an issue talking about periods. And it's still something that's very much stigmatised through the language that's used that makes it seem dirty. We know that 30% of young girls and women in Hull have had financial problems getting hold of sanitary products at some point in their life. Period poverty is very much alive and kicking, and for some women it's the choice between buying a packet of tampons and putting a meal on the table. So Karen, would you mind just talking a little bit more, please, about period dignity and what it's all about and what the aims of it are?
Absolutely, thanks, Christina. Period Dignity Hull is something that's launched recently, and that's not, I'm going to talk about period dignity generally, but certainly if anybody wants to find out about Period Dignity Hull, they do have a Facebook page, and they're on Twitter, so if they just want, somebody wants to just do a quick Google, they'll be able to find out about the specific Hull one. But the reason that I want to talk about period dignity is, as an activist for Unite the Union, it's an issue that we've been campaigning on for several years now. So what is period dignity? So everybody who menstruates deserves period dignity, and that means affordable access, shameless access, and broad access to everything they need to manage the periods. That's from period products to washing facilities. So in short, period dignity is a result of period equity and the solution to period poverty. Period dignity is about education. Education is a key step in breaking the stigma around periods. Taboo topics become less taboo when they're discussed openly and respectfully. Period education at school currently doesn't cover enough ground to empower people with periods to understand what's happening to their bodies, especially if they have undiagnosed period-related health problems. In addition to education around periods in general, education around who has periods and the experiences of periods for traditionally marginalised communities, and that includes disabled people and people who aren't women who menstruate, that's essential. So let's talk about periods to everyone, to our children, to our parents, to our friends, to our colleagues, to our employers. I once worked out that there was only 1 week every month when my period didn't have some level of impact on me. That was the week immediately following. So everyone around me, everyone around you, is affected in some way by the goings on of our cycle. It is not just women's problems. Openly talking, making my sons aware of this, led to openness and understanding. They took care of me if I needed it. My son, my youngest, when he was 19, and he suffers from social anxiety, actually went into our local Sainsbury's, where everyone knows him, everyone knows me, and bought me a pack of Tenor Lady because I had a cough and he wanted to make sure I suffered no embarrassment. That's what talking openly does. I have my period should be as an acceptable thing to say as I have a headache or even I'm having sausages for tea. Until we can be open with everyone about what periods can be like, we will never achieve period dignity for all. Period dignity is also about respect. There is no place for shame in period dignity. Most of the, and you just touched on this, Christina, most of the euphemisms for periods either refer it to being a bad, angry thing, such as curse, shark week, Satan's waterfall, menstruation, gory hole, or they have a sexual basis, messy fun, sugar-coated raspberry, old enough to bleed, old enough to, I'll leave you to work the rest of that one out. I suspect few of these originated from women. Shame and taboo surrounding menstruation can be incredibly damaging. It can lead to lack of health access, lack of products, and lack of education. By respecting each other's bodies, including our periods, we help to remove stigma and shame, making periods easier to navigate with dignity. Respecting people with periods can take many forms. Educating everyone about periods openly and honestly means understanding the needs of those who menstruate without belittling or delegitimising their experiences. Allowing privacy or support when needed, or providing a safe space where discussions around periods can happen without fear of judgment, are all ways of demonstrating respect and period dignity. Period dignity is also about access. So when we speak about period poverty, access to products is usually the central point of focus. Though more than half of the population have, will, or do menstruate, too many lack even the basic access to period products to manage their monthly flows. This can lead to missing school or work every month. There's an organisation called Bloody Good Period. Urge to look at the website. They are absolutely brilliant. They're launching an initiative called Bloody Good Employer to drive change and improve the lives of people at work. Their ambition is to have short, medium and long-term positive outcomes for employees, employers and by default society. They carried out a survey on experiences of periods in the workplace, and some of the statistics are quite shocking. The survey found that 25% of the respondents, who interestingly were largely white cis females from London, never talk about periods at work. 63% felt that their employers could do more to normalise conversations around periods in the workplace. 4%, which seems small but is still a large amount, said that they never have free access to toilets and breaks during the working day. And we know from the union work that we do that this is a particular issue in construction and public transport. 89% experience stress and anxiety in the workplace due to their period. 25% believe that the time they've taken off because of the period has actually impacted on the career progression. 27% of respondents said they never felt supported by their employer, the least supported being the youngest respondents. It's 2021, we should be better than this. In 2018, Unite the Union launched its Period Dignity campaign. This was a follow-on from the Period Poverty campaign and recognised that workers didn't necessarily have a problem with affording products, but had no access to them in the workplace when needed. The aims of the campaign were to change attitudes towards periods. Periods should not be embarrassing for anyone. For employers to provide sanitary products, preferably freely, in the workplace. We want this to be the norm for every workplace. For places of education to provide sanitary products for students and employees. We want this to be the norm so that young women's education doesn't suffer. To ensure that VAT is removed from all sanitary products. Obviously, we have moved forward definitely with the last two. And to support period poverty campaign groups. Women and girls should have access to these vital products. Nobody should face period poverty. The aim was never for employers to provide all the products a worker would need for their whole period. It was more about having free and easy access for those caught short moments. Who of us takes a purse or a tampon with them just in case when we pop to the loo at work? How many of us have sat there waiting until someone else walks in, hoping they've got a spare one we can use? How many of us have put toilet paper in our pants to tide us over until we can get hold of a proper sanitary product, and that carries a health risk? If all workplace toilets had a basket of free products, none of us would ever have to suffer that indignity again. The argument Unite used with employers was a simple one, and that was that the provision of sanitary products was no different from the provision of toilet paper. Periods are a natural bodily function, no different from using the toilet, and no employer would expect their staff to bring in their own toilet roll. Rolls-Royce were the first major employer to be persuaded by this argument. Many have followed. Unite worked on the basis that a basket of products would cost about £6.50, and that includes the basket, and that anyone who took something could replace it when they were able. So you take one when you need it, and then when you were able to buy some, you'd replace the one that you'd taken. So this was never going to be an unsustainable cost to employers. One financial director costed it up at £25,000 a year. We did ask if she was intending on buying them from Harrods. Trying to put these arguments forward can be incredibly frustrating when you have to fight against the barrier of attitude. When I put them to my employer, those very same arguments, a male manager said to me, playing devil's advocate, eating lunch is a natural bodily function. Are you suggesting that the employer should fund everybody's lunch? When I recovered from what I'd just heard, enough to be able to answer, my response was, let me tell you some things about lunch. You can bring a sandwich to work for lunch. You can pop out to Greg's or somewhere nicer for lunch. You can even, should you choose to, skip lunch completely. When you can show me any woman who can choose to skip her period, I will take what you've just said seriously. This kind of attitude is exactly what Bloody Good Period, Unite, and all period dignity campaigners are trying to get rid of. It's 2021, it's not 1956. Although that was a male manager, men aren't the only barrier. As we've referred to before, female members, my own members of my own union, and female managers can have questionable attitudes too, largely it being it's personal and it shouldn't be spoken about. As I've mentioned earlier on, it affects everybody, it's not personal. During that particular meeting, my male reps were proudly wearing Unite's period dignity wristbands. So men are definitely not always the problem. And if I'm absolutely honest, the attitude in that meeting irritated me so much that I went on to make them talk about the menopause as well. I thought I'd send them off with something to think about. So what can you do? What can we all do? If you are a worker, ask your employer to provide sanitary products in their toilets for staff and visitors to use. Part of Period Dignity Hull is that Councillor Hester Bridges is working on having free products available in libraries, which would be a fantastic step forward. Use the toilet roll argument and hope for a better response than I got. If you go on the Unite website, there are downloadable posters that you can use for your workplace. You don't have to be a member to access that part. You can just download them. And finally, period dignity is about sustainability. We are, after all, in a climate crisis as well as a period poverty crisis. And as we combat the lack of access to period products, we also need to be sure that we're protecting the planet and combating pollution. This means more sustainably made period product options becoming widely available and better transparency of what's in period products. Women's Voices for the Earth, once again a brilliant website, have a great campaign tackling this issue called Detox the Box. Reusables, plastic-free, compostable, chlorine-free and organic options must be considered a priority when providing for people with limited access to period products. None of this is possible, however. Nothing that I've just said is possible if we don't talk about periods. So come on, let's do it. Let's talk about periods. Seriously, let's talk about periods. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I certainly wish it was something that was discussed more in my household when I was younger. I grew up with a generation of women who were very much like, it's your monthlies, we'll keep it very quiet, it's very personal. And I think as a direct result of that, you know, like you've said, how many of us have had to stick a bit of toilet roll in our pants and just sit and wait until we got home, or potentially even not being able to go to work or school because we couldn't afford products to use, so we've just had to wait until our period ends. So it's hugely important. Please, everyone, go and have a look on Facebook, find the whole group on Facebook, or you can email perioddignityhull@gmail.com if you want to start a conversation or know any more about it. And I think what's incredibly important is, from, like you've said, Karen, from periods to the menopause, there is so much about women that we're not even talking about, things that we go through, conversations that we aren't having. And as a result of that, you know, people are suffering in silence, and we need to be having those open conversations. That's brilliant. Thank you. Moving on to our next discussion point, which is about women in work, which is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, particularly about an interview that I did in the week with Louise Cheeseman, who many of you know is Managing Director of Hull Trains. And in her interview, she tells a great, well, not a great story, but what turns out to be quite a funny story about when she was interviewed for her job first as a guard, the first female guard in Hull, and she did a day-long assessment, and she came top in all the assessments, and at the end of the day, they got her and the final 4 candidates together, and they said, we've got good news and bad news for you. The good news is you've come top in everything, but the bad news is we're not going to offer you the job because we think you're too posh and it's not the right job for a woman. And she had to argue her case for 15 minutes, that they would give her a go in this job. And obviously over the years, over the last 20 years, she has ascended to being the Managing Director of Hull Trains. And it got me thinking about, I don't think I know any women who haven't at some point experienced some kind of discrimination or barrier because of their gender in the workplace. I know I certainly have. I've worked in lots of different environments. I was the writer in residence at Hull Prison for 4 years, which was interesting to say the least, but I won't go on to say too much about that here. That's for another day. But what I am really interested in is your experiences as women in your roles and what challenges you've come across. Aneesa, can I start with you, please?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's really difficult, I think, sometimes when talking about being involved in politics as a woman is difficult. And there's a lot of pressure to do, and I suppose it's within any role, but I suppose because you're in the media's glare quite a lot, you just always have to be 10 times better than what any man is doing, and your sort of like discussion points or the way in which you articulate yourself or present yourself is always judged more harshly. You know, I remember one of my friends standing to be a councillor, and there was lots of discussion about her piercings, about how she presented, and the fact that people wouldn't vote for her because she looked too alternative or whatever. So there is a lot of judgment on like a superficial level, but I think there's also this sort of attitude of like it can be quite sort of like insular in terms of like being a bit of a boys' club, I guess, and Sometimes some of the best meetings happen outside of the Guildhall or any sort of political meeting. They happen in the pub, and that can be quite limiting to people, you know, of different religions, but also it can be limiting to people who might have childcare, you know, after meetings and stuff like that. So there is, like, you know, some parts of the political world where it does feel as though it doesn't really want women to be involved. But I think there are some good changes that have been going on, and I think locally we've seen more women councillors sort of like getting bored and having those conversations. But yeah, it can be confusing, and there is an expectation of you to be a lot better than any of your female counterparts.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think, Lisa?
I think that's true. I think there's overt and covert discrimination towards women in the workplace still. And throughout my career, I've experienced both. In my 20s, I had a line manager who routinely made sexist comments, and at one point he thought it was acceptable to bound into the office, unzip his trousers, and say to all the women in the room, "What do you think of that then?" And that was the thing that sparked me to take a grievance against him, because that was clearly overt discrimination and harassment. And the simple fact that he thought it was okay to treat women like that was shocking, really. Less overt examples of discrimination and sexism in the workplace, I think I've experienced the sort of subtle underlying assumption that if you're in a meeting and there are men and women, that it'll be women who take the minutes and organise the coffee and, you know, offer drinks around. And in some ways it's easy to challenge that, because it's about voicing the need for people to take a shared responsibility for those sorts of things. But in some ways, women then get perceived as aggressive or harping or overly politically correct, because there is that general acceptance that we will undertake the service type functions in society rather than the leadership type functions. I think there have been some bits of progression over the years, but one of the things that I need to do as part of my role at work is to analyse the gender pay differential at work. And I'm really conscious that the Equal Pay Act was passed in 1975, and we still don't have equal pay in the workforce. And yeah, doing the maths, what's that, 45 years ago? Why has it taken so long for us to make those incremental changes, even though we're backed by the law? And it's a constant process, I think, of challenging attitudes every day in different ways. Sometimes it's little things, and sometimes it's those large, unacceptable, overtly discriminatory incidents. But there's a pressure on women to constantly push back to tackle that sort of sexism and discrimination. One of the things I like is the increasing feminisation of the workplace. We have more women at work these days. And I think the thing that will ultimately change workplaces for the better for women is women in leadership positions. So whether that's politically, whether it's managerially, working in the health service, whether that's clinically, where women lead and have influence and are able to set the agenda, then they can put in place more women-friendly, family-friendly policies and practices. They can just say, right, we're going to have some menstruation products in the toilet, and it becomes a non-issue. People get used to it very quickly, and it becomes the norm. But it doesn't happen, I think, unless women speak up and women are in those positions of power.
Absolutely. Karen, what would your advice be to any women who are watching or who will be watching when this goes out on YouTube, who feel that kind of there are issues in their workplace because of their gender?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer that I'm going to say is to join the union. And I know that the union fees can be quite prohibitive, but different unions have different way of doing that. So most of them, if you're part-time, there's a lower rate. If you're low paid, there's a lower rate. But definitely talk to your union rep, because the one thing that we can do is we can go and we can represent your voice to management. That is our job. That is what we do. I mean, when I first started, I started as union rep because people were coming to me for advice, and I realised there was a point where I couldn't take it any further. Becoming a union rep enables me to take everything that comes to me that step further. But I think the other advice as well that I would give anybody is talk to your peers, because if you believe you're suffering some kind of gender-based discrimination in the workplace, it's highly likely you're not the only one. Yeah. And the more of you that can get together and say the same thing, the more likely you are to be listened to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been in situations where I've been really frightened to call stuff out, and I'll be the first to put my hand up and say that I haven't. And actually, not just with men, but also with other women. I'm thinking particularly of a time just after I'd had my daughter and I was freelancing. And because I was freelancing, if I wasn't at work, I didn't get paid. So I went back after a month with in agreement with my daughter strapped to me, and it was a horrific experience. And I wish I'd kind of been stronger about it, but at the time I wasn't. So I would urge anybody who is feeling like that, or just speak out. You need to talk to people, because I definitely wish I'd done that more. Well, I suppose leading on from that, then the obvious conversation is about COVID, because it will be no surprise to anyone watching or to any of us on this panel that the effects of COVID in many ways have squarely landed on the shoulders disproportionately of women in terms of carrying home learning and managing everything else. We've all been plate spinning and juggling lots and lots of different things. So my question is to you individually: how has it been for you personally the last year? And I'm going to start with Lisa first, if I may.
Well, that's an interesting question. For me personally, what it's meant is working from home, as it has for lots of people, and actually finding that quite a positive experience. I'm lucky in the sense that I don't have school-aged children, so didn't need to try and do that amazing juggling role that so many women have had to do. But it's allowed me to have focus. I think on the challenging side, working from home can be quite isolating, and that's something that we all need to be mindful of in terms of maintaining contact and social contact. But it has freed me up in terms of time, because prior to COVID, I had an hour's commute each way. So I've got 2 hours back in the day, which has enabled me to do some more things with the Women's Centre, where women have been needing our services even more due to the rise in the incidences of domestic abuse. So it's been like the parson's egg, good in parts.
And I suppose we're not really going to understand or begin to know the full impact of COVID for women yet, are we? Although we kind of know women are disproportionately affected because there is already existing gender equalities within society, and there seems to be a more disruptive impact on those sectors that have got high level of female employment, so looking particularly at education, health and social care, and the arts in particular as well. Aneesa, how have you been affected, or the people that you're working with, thinking particularly about women?
Yeah, so it's the casework that I've had over the last year has been enormous in terms of people that are in need in terms of food banks, but also in terms of emotional support. And I think one of the things that we're going to see out of the COVID situation is the fact, the hidden sort of abuse that's been going on behind closed doors, because we've not been able to pick up on it in schools and other such things. So that's been quite difficult to hear a lot of those stories, but also I'm really privileged to be in a position where I can sort of like have influence and help people in that way, and highlight the fact that this is going on. It's also been really strange in a lot of ways. So I'm a bit of a social sponge, like on a personal level, like I feed off other people, and I get my energy of just being around people and all that sort of stuff. So doing all these Zoom calls and stuff like that, when I do see people, I really struggle with eye contact now, like, and just looking at people in the face, and it's going to be a massive shock to the system when we're allowed to, get close and personal again. And I also live by myself, and I love living by myself. Like I'm a strong, independent woman, like thingy. So it's all great, but also at times it's been a bit lonely having to deal with. I've stopped watching the news. Like I'm a politician, but I've just stopped watching the news because I can't. Like look at how it's being managed at the minute, and just looking, like seeing the number of deaths is just, it's just so difficult to comprehend, like that this is what's going on in our country at the minute. But also there's been the other side of things as well, where social media has become quite a big player in it was a big player beforehand, but it has definitely been a bigger player in people's lives in terms of connecting with people. And I think there's that danger of like the way in which noise just sort of amplifies on social media, and the way in which we sort of like get sort of tricked or trained into like, behaving in certain ways because of likes on like social media, and that endorphins that you get, from the likes and chasing that sort of thing. So it's been really weird to look at the way in which like people operate on social media, and I've had a word with myself at times in terms of the way in which I go off on one. So yeah, there's just been all of that to really look at. But I guess the thing that's really inspired me over the last year has been the way in which like people have just set up like mutual aids, and the way in which community groups have been going, and it just shows that if we're ever going to change anything in society, it's going to come from the grassroots. It's not going to be from politicians, like, or people like dictating to the grassroots. It's going to be the grassroots wanting that change. And it's also just reminded me, like, the reason why I got involved in politics was because, like, actually I want to amplify those voices. So in some ways it's been difficult, but I think it's also been a reset as well, to how we should be, looking at and organising our communities.
Yeah. I've done so many Zooms recently with female colleagues that have just ended in tears. I think we're at a real point now where people just feel, and women in particular, so worn down. It's been a whole year, and I think this period after Christmas has actually been the hardest for lots of reasons, but it's dark. It doesn't feel like there's anything to particularly look forward to. The kids have been off school again, which, is difficult in itself, trying to kind of cut yourself in all these different parts where, and I've had guilt. I think there's so much guilt attached actually to being a woman. All of the time I feel guilty that I haven't given my kids due attention, but I feel guilty that I haven't done my job as well as I could have done. I feel guilty that I haven't made the tea. I feel actually go to bed riddled with a lot of guilt, and that's just been exacerbated definitely over the past year, because it's concentrated, isn't it? We're completely insular. We're here, we're not seeing anyone. Mental health is a huge factor in it, and it's been really, really difficult. What do you think, Karen? How's it been for you?
Well, I'm working from home as well, and I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I'm a librarian without a library. I absolutely hate it. I live on my own as well, and I find it incredibly isolating. And actually, I'm the opposite from Aneesa. When I actually do meet people in the flesh, I don't let them go for like an hour. It's like, it becomes really obvious that I haven't spoken to anybody, you know, a real life human being for 3 days. So if I do pop into work, I'm there for like 2 hours, and I will grab anybody who will talk to me. As a trade union activist, the majority of the things that I find out are when I'm walking through the workplace, or I'll be walking through the park or whatever. So it's been a real difficulty for me connecting with members and finding out what their problems are, because most of them don't use Zoom or Teams or anything like that. So that's been a real difficulty for me. And I think as far as my colleagues and my members, particularly the women, the biggest problem that they've had is needing time off when their children get sent home because the class has gone into isolation because there's been a positive, you know, and what the options that they're offered for leave is annual leave. Then when that runs out, you get into the realms of unpaid leave.
Yeah.
And with some schools, I've got colleagues whose child has been sent home 3, 4, 5, 6 times because the class is isolated. So it definitely has had a huge impact on women, without a shadow of a doubt.
That's really interesting, because a friend of mine, she's in a similar situation, and her son's class, they kept having to self-isolate about 3 or 4 times, and it got to the point where her employer had basically threatened her and just said, look, we're going to start just putting it down like you just haven't attended. And there was absolutely no support there for her at all. And obviously, you know, of course, children are your first priority, but we're also thinking about paying the mortgage, paying the rent, paying the bills. How are we going to put food on the table? How are we going to clothe our kids? And you've got kind of someone there saying to you, well, you know, it's not my problem. Just leave them at home, whatever, as long as you come to work. Where's the support? Well, I feel very angry now. So I am going to go to the questions, because we've got some really good questions for you, actually. These are addressed to all of you. So please, if there's a question that you feel that you can answer, please just chip in. The first one is, how can we encourage women to take up roles in the political field and become socially active without necessarily attending education?
I think I'll jump in for that one. I don't think education is necessary in being involved in politics. I think, like, actually politics is about like real life, and it's about power, and it's about our relationship to power within society. And we all have relationships with power, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's within, like, you know, our families, like whether that's within, you know, friendship groups. The fact that I'm talking right now means that I'm holding some sort of power whilst you guys are listening to me. So this is all political. And I think once we break it down into the fact that, you know, that's what we're trying to do, and we want to politics is about organizing that power and how we share that power. That's the only question that you really need to answer in politics, and anyone can have that conversation. So I often find that a lot of the ways in which people try and shut people out from politics is by using like complicated language, or like Westminster politics, like bubble language, so that they don't have to explain really simple ideas to people, because they don't want people to be involved in them. So I would say, if you're interested in your communities, in your society, or whatever, like, you know, join. If you feel attached to a political party, you feel like they represent you, join them, go to their meetings, but also just find people that are doing the stuff within your communities that you, and just ask them, like, just speak to them and talk about how they've got involved in the areas that they have done. A lot of the stuff that I've done has been by accident, and I'm just really lucky that I've just, like, you know, had conversations with people at the right time. And I think it's just about conversing with people and just reminding ourselves that actually we do know a lot more than what people think, like, want us to shut us out from.
Yeah, you're so right about that use of jargon, because it just immediately, there's just a barrier there that is incredibly off-putting, and immediately you think, oh, well, it must be a much bigger sort of concept than I can begin to understand. I'll leave that one alone. But actually, it's the simplest concept that's just shrouded in smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next question, Karen, this might be a little bit more for you, but some women would find it financially difficult to join unions because of their circumstances. With this in mind, how can they become involved in the work of the unions to support them in the workplace? It's a great question.
It is, and I'm absolutely conscious that the membership fees are a bit of a barrier. Obviously, I can't speak for other unions, but Unite the Union particularly, most unions have graded membership fees, but Unite the Union has a community branch. So for, I believe it's something like 50 pence a week, you can actually join the community branch of the union and support each other. You know, you can support your local workplace branch and your workplace colleagues. And I think the more of us that work together, but there are different options for reduced fees. So my recommendation would be to maybe pop online or talk to some union reps from different unions, and actually find out what options there are out there, because there is usually some way that we can find a way to get people on board.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. All right, our third question this evening. These are brilliant questions. This is to everybody. So again, if you want to just chip in, that would be great. How hard, if not challenging, has it been for you in your work in relation to equality and social justice?
Shall I pick that one up first? I think I've had a mixed experience. I described earlier some of the discrimination that I've either experienced or observed in the workplace. But I guess what I would say is that in terms of equality and social justice, it's about whether your colleagues or your line managers or your senior managers in the workplace are open to the discussion. And if they are, then progress can be made because they're able to listen and influence and make change. If they're not open to the discussion, then I think it becomes very constraining and very restrictive, and there's less opportunity to move forward on the agenda of equality and social justice. So I know that not everybody has a wide range of choice in terms of where they work or who they work for, but I think as women, if we can create workplaces that are friendly to women and recognise the diversity and the wealth of life experience that women bring with them, then that's one of the things that we can do for each other in terms of promoting equality and social justice. And I guess just a final point, I don't know if people are aware of Roseanne Barr, but there's quite a famous quote that she made probably sometime in the 90s, which is, nobody gives you power, you just take it. And I often reflect on that in lots of different contexts, and in particularly in the workplace.
Thank you, Lisa. That's a great answer. Aneesa, Karen, anything to add to that before we move on to the next question?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a really interesting one, particularly after the last couple of weeks. What influence does social media and the media generally have in relation to women's inequality? Who'd like to pick that one up first?
I think I'll jump in. So I think that is a really important question. I think one of the really important points about this is about framing, and the media has an incredible responsibility when it comes to framing these conversations. So when we look at, you know, instances of like sexual harassment, or when we're talking about like women who've been victims of like, you know, domestic violence or whatever, sorry, not whatever, but other issues, a lot of the time you can see the way in which the media sort of like portrays sort of certain issues. So I think for me, there was like a recent example of where a woman who was a service user of Westbourne House was described as a spicehead, and described, she was told that she was drinking before she'd been beaten up by like five men. And the headline was framed as, you know, this woman, well, she's a spicehead, whatever. And I think that's the damaging way in which the media like perpetuates the fact that women are responsible for their own, you know, for the abuse that they might experience, or for the inequality that they might experience in society. And I think this goes back to an important point about representation within all areas of life, but I think also within the media, in terms of being able to raise women's voices, you know, in senior positions within the media, so that these voices can actually look at the way in which the framing is going on. So yeah, so that's me.
Yeah. Anyone else want to pick that one up? Social media and media.
Yeah, I think the issue with social media, where we have a huge problem, when you have an organisation like Facebook, which removes photographs of women breastfeeding, or there was a very famous photograph of a woman who posted a photograph of having had a breast removed, and I think she'd had a fantastic tattoo done over it, and that was removed. And yet that same organisation allows horrendous posts about women, sexualization of women and everything. Therein lies the problem. And how on earth, and these people are so powerful, that how on earth we overcome that is an enormous challenge.
I think we put women in leadership positions who eradicate that kind of behaviour. The thing also for me, in terms of specifically domestic abuse, the way in which that's reported in the media invisibilizes women's experiences. So it's very seldom when women are murdered, and between 2 and 3 women every week in the UK are murdered by a partner or ex-partner, it is very seldom labelled as domestic abuse. We don't name that abuse, and therefore it remains something that happens to somebody else, happens over there. It's not something that is as prevalent as it should be reported. And that is a barrier in terms of how we address the underlying sexism in society that's part of the cause of violence against women. So yes, absolutely, the media is extremely powerful in framing our perspectives of women and of how women are treated. And yes, we need to be running the newspapers and running the media conglomerates in order to bring a bit more balance to how women's issues are reported.
Yeah, and I think as well, for me, I've got 2 young daughters. I say young, one's 12, one's 6, but particularly with my 12-year-old, I'm really kind of working with her to teach her this stuff, and for her to I guess listen to her own voice, because I grew up in a household where the kind of whatever was printed in the newspapers, well, that was true because that's in the newspaper, so that's, no one would lie and print it in a newspaper, that can't be right. Through sort of the 80s and 90s, and that was very much my parents' kind of response to things. So I'm really pushing my daughter to challenge And I've done some work in Hull College through First Story with a group of young women, just looking at, I mean, I don't know if anyone remembers that song by Robert Thicke. I won't go into it too much, but the lyrics were absolutely horrendous around the idea of consent and, oh, she's a good girl, you know, you want it, with the actual lyrics. And I worked with a group of young women just to unpick that and what it actually meant. And they weren't actually listening to the lyrics of it. It's just a nice song. What's the harm of it? And it's just kind of, like you've said, Karen, all through this evening, it's having these conversations, isn't it? And kind of challenging and pushing our generation of young people to challenge and know that adults certainly aren't always right, and it does need challenging. Okay, we'll go on to our next question. So, what positive message would you share with women, and what clear message for International Women's Day, which is Choose to Challenge, the theme for this year's International Women's Day, would we say to men?
Can I come in on that one?
Yeah, of course you can.
My message to women would be, nothing that we have today has been gifted to us. Women have had to fight for every right that we have. Women have voices, and when women rise collectively, we get stuff done. That's why we might not be where we want to be, but compared to where we were, and it's women's collective voices that have done that. So my positive message to women is, remember you have a voice, and the more other women you join with, the louder that voice will be. And my positive message to men, would be, stand with us. Just as simple as that. Stand there and shout with us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. Has anyone else got a message that they would like to share with women?
I think for me, it's about, if you can think it, you can do it. And don't be held back by anybody's perceptions or anybody telling you can't do it. You can. You find out the information, you get the learning if that's what you need to do, and then you just get on and JFDI. So that's my positive message for women. And in terms of a challenge to men, I think it's about, consider the impact of your background, your upbringing, your privileged place in society, and where necessary, stand together, but also where necessary, stand aside and allow women to blossom and to flourish.
Thank you, Lisa. Aneesa, I was just going to come to you.
Thank you. What I was going to say was, one of my favourite person from history is Jayabin Desi, who was a Grunwick striker, and she was a short South Asian woman who took on the factory bosses. And there's the immortal line of, "We are the lions, Mr. Manager." And whenever I hear about it, whenever I read about it, I just think the incredible strength of someone who was an immigrant to be standing up for her rights, to be treated with dignity at work alongside her colleagues. And I think, you know, actually any one of us can be that strong person, and it's about making sure that we're supporting each other and that we know that we can occupy space, like we are worthy of occupying space, and that's important. And my message to men would really be about, when you see like that creepy, leery behavior from your other friends, like, don't just expect us to just sit there and just like giggle nervously or whatever. Call it out, like, so that we don't have to, like, call out your mates, because like sometimes we just need, we need you to do that as well, instead of us just sometimes putting up with it, because that's the easier thing to do. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I'd echo that wholeheartedly. And just from me, something that I would say is that don't ever be put off by anybody trying to slap you down. Have faith in yourself. You know, when people say, when you voice your opinion, you're being awkward or you're being difficult, or, you know, you're taking up space that doesn't need to be taken, forge on, because you just need to learn to block that out. And it's taken me a long time to get there, but I definitely am now. But it's very easy to listen to people when they try and pull you down along the way. So don't, is my best advice. We have 2 more questions. How can we encourage, and we've touched upon this a little bit, but just to explore it a bit more, how can we encourage young women to be active in decision making and in having a voice to challenge the injustice?
My experience is that young women are full of energy and full of enthusiasm. And I think one of the things that we can do to encourage them to get involved is to give them information, allow them to see what it is that's happening around them, give them solid, robust, evidence-based information so that they can choose for themselves what they want to take up and how they want to take it forward. And they will channel their own energies towards that once they've understood for themselves what those issues are.
Yeah, that's great advice. Aneesa, Karen, what do you say about encouraging young women?
Well, I think particularly with young women, it's really important that the first step is to validate what it is that they're saying, because it's certainly my experience in the workplace that young people are treated very, very differently from older people. Their concerns aren't listened to, they're not taken as seriously, and you often hear, well, you know, what would they know? They haven't got the life experience that such and such has got. So the first thing you have to do is validate their experiences, their feelings and their thoughts. And I think that once they realise that you are listening and believing and are genuinely interested, that's the first step to getting them to use their voice to become activists.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen.
I would definitely agree with what Karen's just said. I know, like I said earlier, if people hadn't been encouraging me when I was younger in politics, I would never have got involved. And actually, it's also about, like Karen said, validating those experiences, because there's been some things that I just sort of like took for granted, like when I was starting to get political, in terms of the way that people would behave towards me, partly because of my race, but also because I'm a woman. And actually now I have the confidence to properly call them out, and I don't shy away from that, but because other people like validated that. And I'm sure Karen can attest to my many ranty Facebook posts, but also standing up in meetings calling it out. But also, like now that I've also been encouraged in that way, I do the same for other young women as well. And I see a lot of the time when it comes in politics or just in general in life, is just the way in which people men with positions of power, the way in which they treat young women. And I just feel, even if women aren't able to come forward about some of their experiences, actually like calling those people out in a sensible way, in a sensitive way, which doesn't then expose young people that don't have the confidence to come forward, also allows them to occupy that space, because I think they need to, like, people need to know that they're on their side as well.
Yeah, I think one thing for me that's come out this week in speaking to all kinds of different women is the absolute importance of women championing other women. And if I had a quid for every time I'd heard someone say something like, oh, she's getting a bit above her station, oh, look at her, she's climbing out of her box, you know, this idea of putting parameters around women, if you step over that line, you're all right up to that point, but don't step any further. And that comes from women and men. I'm not laying the blame firmly at the feet of men. It comes from both. But yeah, definitely, I think the importance of young women working alongside older or more experienced women is invaluable. Thank you. We've got one last question, and this is for you specifically, Lisa. What are the statistics of Hull in relation to domestic violence?
Okay, well, they are shocking, as they are nationally, but in Hull there are 25,000 women and 19,000 children who are living in a violent relationship. And those statistics come from Humberside Police. It's very prevalent, and makes me very sad and very angry that those number of women and their kids are trapped in abuse. So hopefully we can all support and encourage them to come forward and escape those abusive situations.
So Lisa, if anyone's watching who is perhaps in that kind of situation or knows someone who is, where do they come? How do they get in touch with you? What do they do?
There's a number of ways that they can get in touch with the Women's Centre. Sometimes it's easiest to do that online, and we have a web chat function, and there's a contact form that you can fill in, and our website address is www.purplehouse.co.uk, and obviously that's available 24/7. And then our phone number is 01482 790 310, and there's someone at the end of that line between 9 in the morning and 8 at night.
Okay, thank you. Well, that is the end of our questions and the end of our event this evening. Thank you, the three of you, for joining us. It's been brilliant, and I'd actually love to stay a lot longer and talk to you, or definitely when we can meet up and do it in person, because I think we'd have lots of interesting discussions about all kinds of things and probably get a bit angry together, which certainly isn't a bad thing. Thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks to everyone who's come. We've had a lovely mention here from someone who said, fantastic event. Thank you to you all for the amazing session. Thank you for joining us, Daphne. We've enjoyed every second, and it's goodbye and good evening from us.